Real talk, right? Do you remember how good it was when you could just ignore your family and play an RPG and it was fine? Because you were young.
You're doing great so far. Really menacing.
Avowed brought that back for me. I've been ignoring my wife and son for days. And it's been great. We've been talking incessantly about Avowed over at Eurogamer Towers for the past few weeks for obvious reasons, and there's one idea that keeps popping up, that this decidedly modern game somehow evokes the spirit of the Xbox 360 era. It feels like a throwback to that golden age where we were getting banger after banger on an almost weekly basis. And it was okay for games to offer a few dozen hours of solid entertainment and then just bow out without trying to sell you any hats or monopolise your time to the point where you never played anything else. A game was just a game, and there'd be a new one next month, so it wasn't in danger of becoming anyone's entire personality. Destiny. Avowed absolutely revels in being someone's this month's game, a no-tricks single-player experience that is over well before it outstays its welcome. As the Elder Scrolls comparisons are inevitable, although as I've discussed before on this channel, it's really nothing like Elder Scrolls, I'll just crack that can of worms open now, shall I? If Skyrim is a gap year in the Baltics, Avowed is a 4-day EasyJet special in Corsica, which is an unhelpful analogy that doesn't work. For a start, unless you've got Game Pass, it's still 70 quid. But suffice to say, it feels like a stark contrast against a trend of 300-hour RPGs padded out with procedurally generated quests or online-only forever games that more or less force you to be social with other people in order to progress. Which is awful. Why would you invent that as a pastime? We all have to do it in our real lives. But that's not to say that Avowed is short. It isn't by any reasonable metric. This is a roughly 40-hour game with a decent amount of role-playing depth and replayability. There's a compelling free-form RPG system that encourages experimentation in dialogue as well as combat. There are a number of ways to complete quests and several big branching points in the narrative that are worth revisiting in future playthroughs. And there's a bedrock of rich lore here, established in previous Pillars of Eternity games, that is fascinating for newcomers and exciting for existing fans. Pulling off that most elusive of balancing acts, a sequel that works as a standalone experience. It works tremendously as a jumping on point for the series. I think I can speak from both perspectives here, because I reviewed the first game like a decade ago. I can barely remember it. And I never got round to the second one because I was too busy by that point having a midlife crisis in what people have since dubbed my leather jacket era. It's a great example of something that was thought lost to us a few years back, but is now absolutely thriving. The AA game. Smaller, less expensive games, less expensive to make, not to buy, unfortunately, that lack the sheer gleaming polish that an eye-watering AAA budget can afford, but without the inflated sales expectations and stifling boardroom oversight that comes with that. AA games are a nice halfway house between indies and AAA. Some of the former's freedom to experiment and take risks, but with some of the latter's resources available to actually properly manifest those ideas. The upshot is that you can have a fully realised, fully three-dimensional and premium feeling Pillars of Eternity 3, effectively, with all the lore-accurate environments and deep choice and consequence role-playing you could want. Something within a tennis court of scratching your lingering Baldur's Gate 3 itch, but without Baldur's Gate 3's mocap budget. And so you have to put up with all the dialogue scenes looking like they were directed by Jerry Anderson. And as an aside, I think it's quite funny that the story is about you representing a fairly despised overseas empire in their efforts to colonise an island continent in the north of the world, a sort of Northern Ireland, if you will. I vividly remember the first time I ever stayed awake from one day into the next. I happened to glance at a clock at 3 minutes to midnight, and it felt a rush of dread. What happens at midnight? I didn't know what happened at midnight. Was there a noise? A flash of light? Did everything reset? It seems absurd now, but I was a 9-year-old boy with a wild imagination, and I thought there had to be some kind of fanfare when the date changed, some kind of dark festival. Surely it didn't just quietly tick over. That would mean that nothing matters, and time and space and reality are just a bunch of stuff that happens in an uncaring cosmos. I wasn't ready to face that yet. I hadn't even seen RoboCop, but it did tick over, and I did have to face it, and there was nothing. And I realised that one day everything I loved and was would be dust in a solar wind. How did I end up in this position anyway? What was a 9-year-old boy doing having an existential crisis at midnight in October 1993? I was playing video games, obviously, specifically The Settlers on the Amiga. An absolute banger of a strategic city builder, a rich and polished game for its time that had a string of crap sequels with barely a tenth of the charm. What has this got to do with Avowed, you might ask? Nothing, I'm just off on one. Except that from that day to this, my yardstick for whether or not something is a good game is always, will it make me lose track of time and sail into the following day without noticing? And as life suitcases fill up with the bowling balls and anvils of grown-up responsibility, that metric gets a few addendums like, wait a minute, did I even speak to my wife today? Can I still remember my postcode? What do my wains look like? How many have I got? I thought games like that were becoming few and far between because I was getting old, and I think that is a factor. But it's encouraging that Avowed has been able to send me right past the midnight chime when I'd assumed those games were long gone. It's also encouraging that the people behind this, Obsidian, are part of a growing chorus of industry voices publicly challenging the bean counter narrative that the only metric that matters is growth. Along with the likes of Larian CEO Sven Vinke and ex-BioWare creatives Mike Laidlaw and David Gader, who just had to watch Dragon Age slide into irrelevance after dribbling out a damp squib of a game that was half RPG, half playing camp leader to a bunch of irritating Twitter scolds.
Why are all my attempts to converse with you met with scorn?
Only for the CEO to blame its lackluster performance on the fact that it isn't the same dead-on-arrival MMO dog shit that Electronic Arts squandered BioWare's reputation on once before already. And because of guys like that, not people with blue hair or diverse hiring policies or whatever the some smelly Twitch streamer has told you is the problem with the games industry, the games industry is currently going through one of its bleakest periods, certainly that I can remember. And though it looks like we are now coming out the other end of a brutal storm, the layoffs keep happening. And they keep happening not necessarily because firms aren't turning a profit, but because they're not turning a mega profit, because they insist on every game doing gangbusters purely on the strength of the IP, or because boardroom executives are convinced somehow that we all want to spend our leisure time grinding away in one of their stupid live service tedium factories. We keep jettisoning talent and experience as if the people who bring those things to the table matter less than the feelings of shareholders and investors. And they do, and that's why it's a broken system. Many companies, driven by unabashed short-term greed, are crippling their ability to make tomorrow's games in order to pull off the kind of financial soothsaying that is decimating every other sector in the global economy right now. Still, you gotta laugh, ain't you? By which I mean we're all becoming the Joker.
Don't misunderstand me here.
But Avowed represents something to be cheerful about, an answer to the insanity that says every game must make $1 billion per week or be considered a failure, a testament to the fact that great games are still going to get made as long as there are people who want to make them. There's only one thing you'll hear in both an Obsidian press junket and a Duracell investor call. Fellas, we're never going to stop making AA's, which brings a great sense of relief to both me and your mum. So yes, you shouldn't go into Avowed expecting triple-digit hours of gameplay, AAA production values, and I don't know, a triple scoop of rum raisin while you're making demands. But just as in the glory days of the Xbox 360 PS3 era, you can expect a big-ish game that'll keep you royally entertained until the next big-ish game comes along in the next few weeks, and that's Atomfall, obviously. See, it's not a throwback in terms of flared trousers, it's a throwback to a vibe. It's a throwback to a feeling you had the last time you were eating so good. It's like when recently they had 3 Star Trek shows on, in really quick succession. And that hadn't happened since 1994, 1995, where you had the last season of TNG, and then like season 3 of Deep Space Nine, and then it went straight into like season 1 of Voyager. And you thought, man, Star Trek's never going to be this good again. And it wasn't. I'm not allowed to talk about Star Trek, sorry.